Welcome to Miss Smith's Math Tutorials. I'm Miss Smith. In this video, we're going to be talking about finding reference angles. A reference angle, and I've given you a little definition here, it's the smallest angle that the terminal side makes with the x-axis. We have our little unit circle here, so it starts at 0 degrees, moves to 90, and then 180, and then 270 degrees, and then back to 360 degrees, so it moves in a full circle. So I've drawn 75 degrees here. A reference angle would be the shortest distance from that terminal side, so the side we're talking about, and the x-axis, which is right here. So in this case, that little blue arc, that angle, that's the reference angle. It's the shortest distance from that angle to the x-axis. And I've drawn another example over here. So we have 225 degrees over here. It falls between 180 and 270. And the shortest distance to the x-axis would be right there, that blue angle. So that blue angle is our reference angle. Now, it doesn't have to only exist in quadrant 1 or 3, right? You could have them in quadrant 2 and 4 as well. I just didn't want to overload you with too many angles. A common mistake is for students to think a reference angle is just to the next axis, so from here to here, but it would never be. A reference angle is never formed to the y-axis. It's always to the x-axis, and it's always the smallest distance to the x-axis. Another thing to note is that a reference angle will always be between 0 degrees and 90 degrees. So if you get something bigger than 90 degrees, you've done something wrong. So that's an easy way to kind of double check yourself. We have a set of rules that if you memorize them, it just kind of makes finding the reference angle a lot easier. If your angle, you'll notice that I've used the symbol theta, and theta is just a symbol meaning the angle. Okay, so if the angle we're talking about falls in quadrant 1, then the actual angle is your reference angle. So for example, an angle that falls between 0 degrees and 90 degrees would be like I did here, 75 degrees. Your reference angle is actually just 75 degrees. If the angle you're looking at falls in quadrant 2, then you would follow this rule, 180 minus the angle. And whatever you get, that's your reference angle. If your angle falls in quadrant 3, you would follow the rule, the angle minus 180. And whatever you get, that's your reference angle. And if your angle falls in quadrant 4, then you would follow the rule 360 minus the angle. And the result would be your reference angle. Okay, so let's dive right into an example. We've got 110 degrees here, and we want to know what would be the reference angle. Well, let's think about where 110 degrees would fall. That's definitely more than 90, but it's less than 180. That would fall in quadrant 2. So let's just note that. So 110 degrees falls in quadrant 2. So therefore, we're going to follow our rule for quadrant 2, which is 180 degrees minus theta, the angle. Let's actually plug in what the angle is. So it's 180 degrees minus 110. And when we subtract 180 minus 110, we get 70 degrees. So our reference angle is 70 degrees. 72 degrees. What quadrant would 72 fall in? It definitely falls between 0 degrees and 90 degrees, so that's going to be in our quadrant 1. So let's note that. 72 degrees falls in quadrant 1. And what's the rule for quadrant 1? Well, it's just the angle is your answer. It's just theta. So 72 degrees is your reference angle. Okay, 194 degrees, where would that fall? We know that quadrant 3 goes from 180 to 270, so definitely 194 would be within that quadrant. So let's note that. 194 degrees falls in quadrant 3. So what's the rule for quadrant 3? It's theta minus 180. So theta minus 180. So what is theta? What's our angle? It's 194 minus 180. And let's see what we get. When we subtract 194 minus 180, you get 14 degrees. So that would be our reference angle. For 353, well, that definitely is just less than 360, so that would be in our quadrant 4. It would fall between 270 and 360. So let's note that. So 353 falls in quadrant 4. And the rule for quadrant 4 is 360 minus theta. So let's plug in what we know theta is. 360 minus 353, which would give us 7 degrees as a reference angle. This one says negative 255 degrees. So you might be looking at this thinking like, where would a negative fall? Like, I don't see any negatives on here, and you don't. Right now this is just showing 0 through positive 360 degrees. So we have to find something called a coterminal angle. And I have a whole separate video on finding coterminal angles, and it's pretty easy to pick up. When you have negative 255 degrees, we need to get that to an angle, a coterminal angle that would fall between 0 degrees and 360, because that's where our rules lie. In order to get negative 255 degrees to be a little higher so that it falls in the frame of reference that we need to add a circle to it, add 360 to it. And when we do that, we get to negative 255 degrees plus 360 degrees is 105 degrees. So 105 degrees, well, that definitely now falls where we need it to. So 105 would be just more than 90, so that'd be right here in our quadrant 2, so let's note that. 105 falls in quadrant 2, and the rule for quadrant 2 is 180 minus theta. So we're going to use that new angle, that coterminal angle. So 180 minus 105 is 75 degrees. So 75 degrees would be our reference angle. Okay, so let's do one more together. 401 degrees. Obviously, that does not fall between that 0 degree and 360 degree range. Just like I did here, I'm going to need to find a coterminal angle that does fall within the parameter. In this case, I wouldn't want to add 360 because that's just going to get a higher number, right? I need a lower number because right now my number's way too high. It's at 401. So instead of adding 360, I'm going to subtract 360. Now 401 minus 360 is going to give us 41 degrees. 41 degrees definitely falls in the frame that we need. And 41 degrees would actually be between 0 and 90. So that would fall in quadrant 1. Let's note that. And what's the rule for quadrant 1? Well, it's just theta. It's just whatever the angle is, that's your reference angle. So in this case, our angle is just 41, so our reference angle is 41 degrees. Okay, here's 2 for you guys to try. Go ahead and find what the reference angles would be. I will post the answers in the video description below. This has been Miss Smith's Math Tutorials.